Today we're going to begin a very important course on two mirror image subjects, karma and rebirth, a super course. We're going to go into different examples of each. We're going to show how each one mutually implies the other. A proper understanding of karma will clarify an understanding of rebirth, and understanding rebirth will be supported by an understanding of karma. This is a very important topic because it will result in a much more stress-free life, a life of clarity, peace, and freedom from suffering, and overall lead to greater happiness in every area of life. So we're going to start with karma and we will move into rebirth. Notice the quotation at the bottom, it takes more than one lifetime to fully understand karma. That comes from one of Joseph Goldstein's lectures. If you are not familiar with his work, I recommend that you look him up online. He's quite popular in Buddhist communities. And that is indeed true. If you are finding this video, I'm not going to guess at why, but I'm going to assume that you are either looking to find evidence for karma because you suspect it, or past life, or rebirth, or anything of that nature. If you're looking for evidence for it, if you're looking to study it for some sort of an academic purpose, to investigate for an article, or even to mock it because you find it unsound, and you're comparing it to some other religion or faith or understanding of the world, it doesn't matter. But it does help to know that it takes more than one lifetime to fully understand karma. Meaning if the subject is mysterious to you, that's okay. It's mysterious to us all, and it's one of those subjects that we're going to come away with a better understanding of by resolving that we won't understand every aspect of it. So let's start into part one. Let's talk about defining karma. Karma comes from the Sanskrit kama, which just means your action. Not to jump ahead too much, let's first talk about what karma is not. First of all, it is not a health and wealth gospel of sorts. Now, in the Western religions, Christianity for instance, there is a precept that if you do go out and you do good, God is going to reward you with wealth. And this is especially noticed in TV preachers, people who go around and they say, well, if you'll give to my ministry, you'll get, if you give $40, somebody will anonymously come along and give you $80. Or if you're struggling with your health and you donate to X ministries, you will come away with healing or something of that nature. That's not what karma is. Most people describe karma as if you do good things happen. If you do bad things happen. That is not the best way to look at karma. At best, it is an incomplete way, but it's strictly speaking not accurate to say that. Secondly, it is not religion. This is not a religion that I'm selling you on. This is not something mysterious and spooky, even though it can seem mysterious in some respects. There's no faith that I'm asking you to have here. It doesn't work that way. Those of us who study the Eastern religions know that the idea of faith and the dichotomy of faith and works, all of those things are very westernized in concept. The Abrahamic religions have gone out of their way to sort of cut open a distinction between the things you do and who you are, as if they're separate things. So we're going to have to build a bridge and put that back together eventually. But I'm not selling you on anything. I'm doing nothing more than being like a musician here who is bringing to you a song that he loves. It's not about belief. It's just about reality. Thirdly, karma is not a moral law. And again, this gets back to the idea of doing good and good things happen, doing bad. It's because if you think about it like a law, you're going to run into the issue that many times it does not appear to work. It's like the 55 mile an hour speed limit. How many cops are going to enforce that today? You see a speed limit, it says 55. What that really means is 70, because most speed limits in the U.S. now are 70 miles an hour. Now that depends on the cop. The cop might see you and ticket you for 1 mile over the limit. Or he or she may let you go about 3 to 5 miles over the limit. There's no definite law, even though there's a posted law. So, but when you say law, you're talking about nailing something down as if this, then that. And that's where the danger comes in, because you and I know many people who are rich and evil and poor and virtuous and vice versa. You know that many people are born with mysterious health conditions in mysterious circumstances, and their lives don't appear to take a logical pattern at all. Well, you can't attribute or impose morality on those sorts of findings. So again, I caution you against thinking about karma as some sort of a moral law, even though it is a morally governing principle, similar to how physics governs the particle world. Or you could say physics and any other discipline you could make as an analogy. There are plenty of things we do not understand about it. So those are the things that karma is not. Now let's talk about what it is. As mentioned, it comes from the Sanskrit word karma, which means your action. But it carries an idea that is not found in English. It carries additional ideas like memory, identity, momentum, and movement. And as we're going to see, liquidity. It's more fluid in its nature, and spotting it and understanding what lies behind it is going to be dependent on your level of wisdom and your level of mindfulness and self-awareness. So, memory. There's a type of memory in your cells. Identity. How you view yourself and what you view yourself. Momentum. Similar to a car running, Evel Knievel, jumping a ramp in a car that's going really, really fast. Your momentum is something that you create. And when the time comes when you're not able to create it, you're coasting on the momentum, much the same way a race car driver is coasting on their momentum down the racetrack. And then movement. As we're going to see, karma, all of these ideas, these 4 words, are part of what we would call your action. So you'll notice in the background of this little nice presentation here, the iceberg. And it's an iceberg. And as is the case with all icebergs, you have a phrase associated with them, the tip of the iceberg. What does that mean? A small amount of the iceberg is actually seen while the rest goes underwater. Icebergs can go miles underwater, and just the tip is poking up. And that little tip is what you see and you react to, but the tip of the iceberg, that's just the tip of the iceberg, as they say, right? So that's how you should think of karma. There are ways that you can see karma in action, and we're going to give some examples of those that are obvious. There's actually, what I'm thinking right now online are those instant karma compilations. Someone gets out of their car and smacks somebody or throws trash at somebody, and then their car goes out of control and hits another car, and the person starts laughing at them. Someone attempts to do something and immediately gets caught. I think those are really funny. So, but that's the tip of the iceberg. That's not how deep karma runs. Of course, you'd have to be really a fully enlightened being to understand all there is about karma, and none of us should claim that. It is like gravity or like physics or any other sort of law. Not a legal moral law, but a law that affects every aspect of our world down to the underpinnings of the smallest particles. And you can see up in the upper right-hand corner there some toes in the water. Somebody's just putting their toes in the water. Imagine for just a moment being this person. You're putting your toes in the water, and you just move your toes slightly. If the water were perfectly still, you would see the ripples in the water shoot out to much further than you could even possibly know or see. But of course, the water's not still. There's a current. There's disturbances. There's plankton and fish and other activity going on in the water. An entire universe all itself, just as there is in your body and in your cells. There's an entire universe there that has its own karma at work and its own forces at work. Well, water is like this. If you go right now and you stand in your bathtub and you let the water become perfectly still, if you even move slightly, that will create a ripple. That, friends, is exactly how you should think of every effect you've ever had in the world. when it comes to the things you do, the seeds you plant. Another really good analogy to have here. So properly understood, karma becomes a clarification of rebirth, again in connection with that last point and about the planting seeds. A wise man I once knew, he had a headache and he was going to miss meditation, and there were many people depending on him, and he talked to one of the senior monks, and the monk said well, weren't you going to stay home today, because I know the monk suffered from migraines. And he said, no, I didn't want to plant that seed. So he came anyway and meditated for 45 minutes with the young students that were there. Notice that power. He said, I didn't want to plant that seed, meaning everything you do is like planting of a seed or the ripples of water. So we're going to get more into that as we go. Buddha had many people in his lifetime ask, why does this happen? Why is this person born with a club foot? Or why is this person born sickly or small or weak? Why is one born an idiot and another born really smart? Why does someone fall victim to thieves and violence and another is wealthy and well off and enjoys livelihood up until their deaths? And this is one example of what Buddha would say or said. All living beings have actions, karma, as their own, their inheritance, their congenital cause, their kinsman, their refuge. It is karma that differentiates beings into low and high states. Very good summary of our subject matter. In short, karma affects everything, and we're going to come back to that. So let's jump ahead here. Now, here's what we have to do to avoid problems. We have to talk about the types of karma. And we're going to do this in the next slide. There is karma that you receive, and there is karma you give. Now let's go back to when you were born, when you were even first conceived. You received the karma of everything around you. When you had no control. And liken this to buying your first car. For those of you who've had to purchase a car, you've run into the fact that when you're a young man or woman, you don't have any credit. What do you have to do? You have to go get a cosigner. And if you're really young, that ends up being mom or dad or your uncle or grandma or somebody who can sign the note for you because you haven't done anything yet. You haven't achieved any status or clout. Because you just, it's not your fault. You just haven't done anything. The same thing with references on a job application. Back in the old days, you would babysit or mow lawns, and you would get your neighbors to be your references for your first gig. And then when you took some odd jobs, eventually you were mature enough to get on and put some references down on a paper application. Man, those were the days. It's a long time ago now. But that's what you distinguish between karma that you receive. Remember, karma means action. Action you receive and action you give. Now what you're going to find is these are ultimately the same. Most have an ebb and flow or average karma. So look at the comparison here. You start out with a certain measure of health, a certain measure of wealth, a certain measure of fame, a certain measure of power, intellect, and we could of course break these down into different categories. Now those are things that you had zero control over because, again, you were inheriting the karma of others, the actions of others. The others' actions were your actions. The same way you are Catholic when you are a baby, you're born into a family, or Jewish or any other religion. You're born into a family, that becomes your religion because you're not yet old enough to speak for yourself and decide what it is that you are, what defines you and your lifestyle. But where we get into trouble is contemplating karma and not thinking, or rather thinking that we have a self or an I. This is so dangerous because it's an ego construct. The ego construct is that part of you that says, what about me? I need this. Who's going to look out for me? When do I get the corner office? And this is why, even though Buddha didn't say it in so many words, he stated, he tells us, we learn from all of the enlightened teachers of every age, really of every religion, that there is no self. there is no self. It's not as though the universe was doing fine and then one day you were there and then you're there for eternity. That is selfish thinking in a sense. It's spiritually selfish thinking. But this idea of an ego construct, of you living forever, of having an identity, is what's causing all of these problems. You are a recipient of all of those who came before you, just like you are, if you're an atom of water, you are being moved by all of the atoms of water in God only knows how large a container. We can't see down that far to see the influences on the smallest particles. We're just now beginning to understand how deep the rabbit hole goes in terms of physics and interdimensional physics and particle physics. All of this stuff is crazy. Quantum world is crazy. In the same way, you are unable to perceive your karma, the things that happen to you versus what you do. What we find in contemplating karma is that both received and given karma are much the same. And I have in there, just for kicks, Clint Eastwood in the 1992 movie Unforgiven, where he comes to Gene Hackman's character at the end and he goes back on his killing spree because William Money was based on an actual real character in history, a mass murderer who killed women, children, anything that creeped, anything that walked, anything that crawled, and his wife turned him around. But ultimately at the end of the movie, his true karma comes back out and defines him. He's still a killer at heart, despite all of that time. And one of the things I loved in the movie so much was about the young guy that pretends to be hard and tough, and he finds out I'm not like you, Will. I'm not like you because I'd rather be blind and ragged than dead. He couldn't deal with it when he first killed someone. Whereas someone like William Money, that was who he was. He was a killer. What does he say to Gene Hackman's character? He says, deserve's got nothing to do with it. Would that we would remember those words. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. So stop thinking when things happen to you that you deserve it. And this is where people do a great disservice to their fellow man by thinking that someone suffering has done something evil. That's not the case. In reality, the karma that you receive has nothing to do with blame. It has nothing to do with wrong in many cases. Now, again, there are some things where it is obvious that you have created the friction you encounter. You have created the hatred, the animosity you've generated, the jealousy that you suffer from. And you do it of choice, because karma means your action. It means the thing that you do. But there's also a way something is your action because you are the recipient of it. And since there's no you, there's no I, you don't say I deserve it. You just identify with it. Karma received versus karma given. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. At least that's true a lot of the time. We stop making this false distinction about karma, what we deserve when we think of karma. Instead, we see ourselves as recipients and givers. People who receive and people who give. You breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide. It's an exchange. Just like all the forces of Earth, all the forces of nature, there is a reciprocality to it, and it's like that with action. Let's jump ahead here. So let's talk about the law of karmic exchange. Karma is just like currency, just like monetary currency, which means it can be added to, it can be subtracted from, it can be multiplied, it can be exchanged. Think about how this works. Remember the 1997 movie with, I think, Val Kilmer? Was it? It may not have been Val Kilmer. I'm trying to think now of the actor's name. But there was a movie about a small town, and some corrupt CEOs dumped some toxic chemicals into the river of a small town rather than properly disposing of them, and that made children suffer. And of course, the movie pointed out how difficult it is to get justice because of harmful actions where nobody wanted to take responsibility. You can think of 1,000 such situations. But here's the reality of karma, folks. You, when you are mindful of your actions, harming living beings, doing wrong to others, if you are not mindful of that, then you're going to be a monster. And you're going to instinctively do things that later you want to cover up or deny or lie about or justify. That was an example of that movie. Karma can be used like that. Someone can get so mad at you that they choose to blame you for something that you didn't do. They can choose to dump toxic chemicals in a pool that make people sick and then later lie about it. They can choose to sexually assault you if you are a female. They can choose to do any number of things that would be suffering for you. And you share a relationship with them. Go back to the comics. For those of you who are comic people, look at the relationship between Galactus, the Planet Eater, and Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer was created as, he's more powerful than Superman. He was created to be a herald and to go be a devourer of worlds and serve up a chopped up world so that Galactus could consume it and its inhabitants. And eventually, Silver Surfer breaks free. But Silver Surfer, even after he defeats Galactus, shares a bond because he had to accept that there's always a choice. He felt like there was no choice because he was empowered by the great Galactus, but eventually he broke away. In that same way, the sexual assault victim and the perpetrator share a bond. The first person that a person has a conjugal relationship with, they are connected in a very similar way. A corrupt boss, a bully on the school playground, all of these people have a karmic exchange relationship with you. How many of us had a bully? How many of us were a bully? That exchange is what created you. So again, getting back to what we've already covered, you are your karma, you are your action, and your action is you. In the same way that a potter fashions clay, the potter is the clay. The dancer is the dance. The poem is the writer. You sustain a relationship and you permeate. When you are born, you have only the karma you receive, but later amass a wealth of your own. Now you contribute more into the world than you once did. Let's go back really quickly and talk about the karma you give. Are you disease-free or no? Are you generous or no? Are you attractive or no? Are you famous? Well, if you go and you look back, it may not always be obvious how, but a person who is disease-free has a measure of health, but they may not teach it. They may not give it back to the world. But a person who is not disease-free and is sick may conquer their disease and in turn give karma of the teaching of how not to suffer from a disease into the world. The same thing with wealth. Now it happens to be the case that those who are generous are generous because someone else in another time was generous and they've inherited that blessing. And as a result, they learn to invest. Look at Donald Trump. Regardless of what you might think about him, he has the ability to be wealthy. When I say the ability, that means wealth is attracted to them as well as they are attracted to wealth. So that even when he went bankrupt, Donald Trump, I think it was 2008, he was able to win that back very easily. How do you explain that? How is it that the people that have the tools to make money can keep making money? That's their karma. They have received the endowments to be successful, be it friends in high places, relationships. Why? Because someone had to receive that. We're going to talk more about that when we get into Rebirth. Someone had to receive that. If you combine their genetics, their physical and mental aptitude, their connections, the wealth that they inherited from childhood and or the business school that they went to, the teacher in their second grade class, all of those things equal what we call karma. It happens to be the case that those who are exceptionally attractive tend to also be very kind and use smooth words. Think about this just for a minute. I can't prove this to you. But if you will notice, the most angry, troubled people you know tend to be very coarse or rough or abrasive physically. And they tend to also be unattractive and angry. Very often you do not see suave, attractive people who are also angry. Think about it before you disagree with me. The Buddha said long ago that people who are given to harsh speech over lifetimes, that generates ugliness. That's very counterintuitive, is it not? You would not think that something like that would happen, but you do find it, if not over one lifetime, then over multiple. The same way it is more obvious in the case of generosity, how someone who's generous receives back a portion of what they do. Even when they're broke, they're able to recover themselves and be strong. How about intellect? How about good and bad, being good and bad in a discipline? Let me tell you this, folks. I went years. I was terrible at math. They tried to get me to do all sorts of things in all the way through college. I had 3 tutors give up on me. It was just awful. I could not get it at all. And I thought to myself, I was so hard on myself. I was like, and I couldn't do mechanics. I couldn't weld. I couldn't fix a fridge. I went to I went to shop class in high school. The guy didn't want me there. He hated the teacher. He couldn't stand that I could not get it, and he felt like a bad teacher. In reality, that was not my karma. There are certain things that are simply true about you that you are good at or you're bad at. Those are things you need to learn to love, folks. A little bit of wisdom there. These are things you need to really love, because you're going to run into the fact that you're bad or good at something is itself an open or closed door. It's an open door. If you conquer it, you can break through. But if you don't, you're not meant to. It's something that will steer you away from something you're not supposed to do. And in the end, you will find that all of the endowments, the things that others say you're good at, the things that others can see about you are the path you should take. And what you will find is later in life, for those of you who are very young, you will keep coming back to this later in life. You'll keep coming back to the fact that you get steered away in your career choices, in the things that you're good at. You'll keep being led back to a path that is distinctly you. You may not be old enough to see that yet, but if you are, you'll find that there are certain things you do, even if you're not paid for them, that you're just good at and that you would do anyway. And that, by the way, is free career advice. The thing that gives you more energy than it takes from you is what you're supposed to be doing. The thing you would do for free is actually the thing that you're supposed to be doing. That tells you something about the karma that you possess. So a little bit of a tangent there. We're going to jump back ahead to where we were. So you amass a wealth of your own. Now the karma that you're giving is manifesting from who you were. Now we're going to stop. We're not going to go any further in terms of where you got that karma from, because that's going to get us into rebirth. We're going to discuss that later. But we are going to finish out here. So the law of karmic exchange is continually being exchanged, traded, accumulated, and canceled, as we've seen. But what you don't see is all of the small karmas that you've amassed that are paying off. Every time you hold a door for someone, every time you think of someone, every time you write someone a thank you card, every time you put in a good word for someone to be able to get a better job, you write a letter of recommendation for an employee, you of course feed your dog and your family and do all the other good things you do, which you have no way to keep track of. When you do those things, those are continually paying out. Some karma yields fruit in this life, and some karma yields fruit long down the road. And you can exchange anything. So let's take the instance of a leader, and you'll see the old wise leader up on the top right there. A wise leader is doing good. He's doing many good things. He's feeding his people. He's exercising authority over his district. He is causing blessings for his constituents, his lobbyists. Hopefully he's a good ruler. But if he's a bad ruler, he's doing bad things. And of course, most rulers are doing evil things, and they're doing good things. And what's happening? They're canceling each other out. So you have karma that is positive, and then you have karma that is negative, and the neutral effect is to stay where you are. Most of your karma is very small and yields immediate fruit. but it's so small that it's not going to really move the needle. The same thing with the bad things you do, and as a result, you go through life, you're pretty much average in most respects, right? How many of you listening to this are actually really talented? You're a world-renowned marksman. How many of you listening to this are one of the greatest mathematical geniuses ever? How many of you are probably not? You're probably somewhere in the middle. Not to worry. You are where you are, and you are where you need to be. But sometimes there's a way to do something evil. Look at the lower right picture. Guys holding a woman hostage. You unfortunately hear evil done on the news every day. And of course, it's a sad fact that evil is what sells, is what people want to hear more about and see more about. And it's really terrible. Guy loses it and kills his kids. Guy decides to shoot himself in the head. Those are things that you can do things that are karmically evil, that are karmically gonna end the game for you. And one example here is a hostage. What's going to happen? You become a mass shooter. Well, they're going to take you out because there are things you can do to go from DEFCON 5 all the way to DEFCON 1. How many of you saw War Games? There's things you can do to get kicked right out. You make enough noise in a business or hotel. I used to manage hotels all the time, and one of the things we would have to do is kick out rowdy people. When you do that, there's things you can do on step 1 to go all the way to DEFCON 1. You're like, you've jumped many orders of magnitude. Don't try it. You go down there, grab a pistol, and say, I'm just going to make everybody pay. Well, now you're going to receive the karma of death. There's things you can do to end your game. But all along the way, you have a big continuum of less karmically evil and less karmically good, more karmically good. And it's a big spectrum. So think of this in terms of all the good you do. This is why a leader stays in power. This is why your life goes the way it goes, because most of the things you do are pretty low key, right? The process is not always obvious, and sometimes it is. I hope I've emphasized that enough. Karma is something you take advantage, you completely forget, because it's something that doesn't allow you to fully see. Again, going back to that iceberg. Paul said to the Corinthian church, your labors are not in vain in the Lord. And of course, the parable of the last judgment. Lord, when saw we thee hungry or naked or in prison? When did we see you? You did it when you didn't do it to your fellow man, you didn't do it to me. And when you did it to your fellow man, you did it to me. This is how easy it is to forget. Matthew 25, I believe, was the latter comparison. This is why this is so powerful, because you forget how deep karma runs. But here's the thing, you don't need to. Last slide for part 1. How do we apply this? What you learn from karma, or the study of karma, is the fluidity of all things. Remember, we started emphasizing that karma is not really a law. It is a governing principle similar to physics, similar to hydrogen particles, similar to flowing water. You'll see Bruce Lee in the left-hand bottom corner. Bruce Lee was famous for saying, be like water. Water accepts any shape that it was in. Really, that's where we're going. When you're thinking of karma correctly, you're thinking of it in its fluid form. But it's not just one item that you're studying or that you're contemplating. It's the entire cosmos. The karma that you contemplate is the fluidity of all things. It is the force, to use the words of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He said, the force is what permeates us, it penetrates us, it is the force behind all forms. The first chapter of John 1:1, talks about the Logos, the Word. That is a word, that is a concept, that is a Stoic concept, and it was known long before Christianity. The Word, the blueprints behind the form. Now we're understanding karma a little more. All things flow together. You don't need to understand those things any more than you need to know how many bags of rice were sold from your local supermarket. How could you go out and figure how many peas or grains of rice were sold from a given date in all of your area? Well, you'd have no way of knowing. And it's the same thing, just like our toes in the water analogy and the forces that we create. But the counterintuitive aspect of that is the more you quit trying to understand all aspects of it and you start trying to own it, you understand that everything that happens is proper. Your karma has to be your karma. And it's always good and it's always right. This eliminates self-judgment, it eliminates grief, it eliminates regret, it eliminates anger, because those things exist when you try to take control of a process instead of saying, this is my karma. This concludes part 1. We will begin part 2 soon.